Coming up, the biggest climate summit of the year follows one of the most contentious elections in U.S. history.
And massive raids? Massive detention camps? What are they talking about?
All I do is say the truth.
COP29 delegates in Baku weigh in on what's now believed to be a dubious future for global sustainability and climate finance.
There's a lot of reasons to be concerned that he's going to be incredibly hostile to climate action.
We know that the world can't address the climate crisis unless the rich countries actually pay out for the harm they've caused.
We know he's very frugal when it comes to giving away US funds. He's all about America first. He can do a lot worse.
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, an important deal is penned at the summit.
Enhanced cooperation on carbon markets under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement has a huge untapped potential to unlock the much-needed public and private capital.
And nations struggle to unite to prevent environmental collapse.
You talk about global commitment, which is great, and a unifying vibe there. But when you look at international media, it has been brutal in terms of reporting on the Azerbaijan COP29 presidency.
And no COP climate summit is complete without its fair share of controversy.
Let's be honest, we're here at a finance COP.
Just 2 degrees is on now.
Developing countries must not leave Baku empty-handed.
So it's another 4 years of Donald Trump heading up U.S. affairs, and once again, world leaders will have to deal with him when it comes to getting America to fulfill its climate obligations. Here's what we saw the first time the former reality TV star was the leader of the most powerful nation on earth.
It's very intermittent, got a lot of problems, and they happen to make the windmills in both Germany and China.
Darling, I'd like to watch the president tonight on television. No, you can't. The wind isn't blowing, right? The wind isn't blowing. There's no television tonight, darling. The wind isn't blowing. And by the way, our house went down to about 30% of the value because we're near a windmill that makes a lot of noise, kills all our birds, and ruins the landscape. Other than that, it's a wonderful thing for the environment. These people are crazy.
We don't have a global warming problem. They don't use that term anymore anyway because, as you can see, the planet, it's very cool out here today, isn't it?
We're going to gain 1/100th of an inch in the ocean and have a little more beachfront property. It's going to be a terrible thing. No, it's a hoax. The whole thing is it's so crazy.
But it's not global warming because at certain points it starts to cool a little bit, like now, but like this period. And they're getting killed with global, so they changed it. You know what the term is? Climate change. This way, if it gets warmer, it's fine. If it gets cooler, if it rains, if snow comes down in the middle of the summer, it's climate change, you know?
Yeah, I don't believe it.
Conservative leaders, think tanks, and intellectuals must be fearless in calling out the lunacy of what you're seeing and what you're being led into. The world is not ending. Our future is not dying. We have to defeat the climate hoaxsters once and for all.
A lot of people are worried at this point in time. Many climate activists are completely concerned. What's the perspective of Action Aid?
Yeah, I think they're right to be concerned. I mean, Donald Trump was really clear both in the last time he was president and in his campaign and in Project 2025, which, while he did disavow on the campaign trail, is definitely a real wish list for a lot of Republicans. There's a lot of reasons to be concerned that he's going to be incredibly hostile to climate action and really opposing it and pushing fossil fuel industries forward.
Yeah, Project 2025 is a very serious issue. I know in it, the entire thing is to make the government a lot smaller and restructure all the departments of government and how they work. Worst case scenario, if the US pulls out again out of the Paris Agreement, out of the UNFCCC, how does this set us back?
So how that would exactly play out, I think, is yet to be determined and certainly something we should be pushing back on. As far as how it sets us back, I mean, I think that there's, when we're thinking about the incoming presidency, we should be thinking both about domestic policy and international policy. And internationally, we know that climate finance is not going to be flowing even as much as it was during the Biden administration, which was pretty inadequate.
Renewables like solar and wind are surging. People are using them more. They're cheaper than ever. But do you see anything in the Azerbaijani presidency, anything that can potentially come out of COP29, in addition to the new election of Donald Trump? Could these things derail renewables progress?
Yes and no, I would say, because let's also be honest. Interestingly, under the last presidency of Donald Trump, Texas has continued their renewable energy uptake because it just makes economic sense. Today, 80% of the new installed capacities in renewable electricity are in electricity power generation are renewables because it is in most of the country the least cost option. And if you take the state of Texas, for instance, if it was a national government, they would have been at the 5th position in the worldwide comparison in terms of renewable energy investment and installed capacity. So I just think this is one aspect that is clear. Let's also speak about, you see, this is maybe a bit cynical, but Elon Musk's business on electric mobility here might actually be quite positive for maintaining the energy transition because the electric mobility will need clean, renewable fuels.
So not only did Trump lead the US into a more aggressive climate agenda the last time he was president, he also reneged on promises to rein in greenhouse gas emissions and ramp up the green transition, adding insult to injury. President Biden did not attend COP29 along with several other world leaders, Brazil, China, India, to name a few. But the climate convention did end its first week with a slew of agreements, including a global carbon market framework. A big win for Azerbaijan would be to pen deals of climate finance and loss and damage compensation. Well, numerous countries and communities are hoping grants, not loans, will be provided when climate disasters strike again. But disagreements persist over who will pay into the fund and how much. Everyone is also looking at COP29 to see what will be said and decided about the so-called new collective quantified goal. Essentially, that's a target for the funds that should be mobilized every year to support environmental projects in developing countries. But it's been the source of much debate over the past year, with wealthier nations arguing they should not have to bear the financial burden for other countries, despite their own culpability in the crisis. My first question to you obviously has to be to figure out if you're as nervous as many other people after the election results in the US last week. Does a Trump presidency make you nervous?
Well, a Trump presidency is interesting to observe, because from a global South perspective, from a climate perspective, there isn't really such a huge shift in terms of U.S. commitment to climate action. Let's put things in context. The Biden administration last year, when they contributed to the loss and damage fund after it was finally created, the U.S. contribution was $17.5 million, which is a drop in the ocean in terms of how much the U.S. actually owes in terms of climate debt to the developing world as the largest historic polluter.
But aren't you nervous that Trump can do a lot worse, because he might drop out of the UNFCCC? We know he's very frugal when it comes to giving away U.S. funds. He's all about America first. He can do a lot worse, couldn't he?
So we go into these climate negotiations as if we have nothing to bargain with. We go in as if we're going to beg for charity, whereas we should be going in with the geopolitical and economic leverage to negotiate with somebody like Donald Trump, who's, a self-declared deal maker. He's not your traditional politician engaging in international relations in the traditional way of doing things. So it's the responsibility of the rest of the world, including Europe, by the way, to engage with the Trump administration on a different with different tactics and strategies.
I see your point about the angle from which the African continent should negotiate, from a position of power, from a position of the knowledge of its rich resources. But do you really think somebody like Donald Trump will look at it in that way and will succumb to any demand that you have on the continent? Because we know from past experience what he said about African countries.
Well, here's the thing. Imagine for a moment that we have a block of, say, 30, 40 countries from Africa and the global South without China designing their joint industrial policy. As a block of countries, you have all the critical minerals you need for the high-tech revolution that we need to manufacture and deploy renewables, clean transportation, high-tech products, and so on. We have the complementarity of resources and capabilities as a block, and we have the youngest labor force on the planet here on the African continent. Somebody like Donald Trump is more likely to engage in bargains of that scale than probably the Biden administration or other U.S. administrations in the past, because he's interested in business and he's interested in dominating. And he knows that a bargain like this with China or with other economic blocs will leave the U.S. behind. The design of this geopolitical bargain is not to allow China to dominate the global economy, but to use this small window of opportunity of geopolitical competition and tension and this new rearrangement of the global economy to reposition Africa and the global South at the center of a new international economic order.
But do you think leaders in your region can use that savvy that you're displaying here to leverage the interest in the continent by China, by the European Union, and furthermore to leverage that interest to get the US involved and more so in investments in the continent?
Because what we're describing is really disruptive to the existing geopolitical hierarchy, which is a colonial hierarchy. So it's not like it's going to be well received by countries that are not favorable to seeing the African continent finally escape the bottom of the global hierarchy. So when it comes to the climate issue, for example, the sub-Saharan region of the African continent alone is owed $45 trillion between now and 2050 in climate debt. Climate finance, from our perspective, is development finance. And climate finance is also climate reparations for climate debt that is owed to the global South. And we want climate finance to be delivered in the form of debt cancellation, not debt rescheduling, especially debt cancellation of all debts related to climate costs that have been incurred in the global south. Number two, we want climate finance to be in the form of grants, not loans and further economic entrapment. And number three, we want transfer of life-saving technologies to allow us to manufacture and deploy the building blocks of climate resilience and adaptation, starting with renewable energy infrastructure.
Well, a month before COP29, the COP16 Biodiversity Summit was held in Cali, Colombia. Great choice of location considering the Latin American country holds an impressive amount of plant and animal life and is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world.
If you care about the environment, COP16 should definitely be on your radar. It's the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Like the Climate COP29, the Biodiversity Conference brings global governments together. But while they're deeply connected, they tackle distinct burning issues. The biggest for biodiversity is arguably the ongoing collapse of many wildlife populations, plunging an average of 73% in the last 50 years, according to the World Wildlife Fund's 2024 Living Planet report.
We do need all hands on deck. The scale and pace of biodiversity loss are exacerbated by climate change, land degradation and desertification, and pollution and waste in their multiple forms.
While the Climate COP is about cutting emissions to save the Earth from global warming, the Biodiversity COP is about the fight to protect nature itself, ecosystems under threat, endangered species, and the genetic richness of all life. At COP15 in Canada almost 2 years ago, 195 governments agreed to more than 24 ambitious goals, including protecting at least 30% of the planet's land, coastal, and marine ecosystems by 2030. Other goals are tackling the impact of plastics, pollution, and funding for environmentally destructive industries.
La economía extractivista, extracción de recursos maderables, extracción de recursos minerales, oro, carbón, todo ese tipo de extracciones están colocando en grave riesgo a los pueblos indígenas, pero también a toda la humanidad como al planeta mismo.
This year's new goals include the possible creation of a permanent body to represent indigenous groups and boosting biodiversity aid to developing countries, and of course trying to assess the success or failure of previous goals. But like the Climate COP, this COP is a struggle to get governments to deliver. For example, that marine ecosystem protection goal set to reach 30% in 5 years worldwide. The Marine Conservation Institute reports it's currently at little more than 8. To make matters worse, no goal set at these summits has ever been met. Climate watchdog The Carbon Brief looked at how many nations even succeeded in submitting their plans to protect nature, plans also meant to measure progress. Ahead of COP16, 80% failed.
I caught up with Alain Richard Donwahi, the COP15 president of the 2022 Biodiversity Summit. The conference takes place every 2 years. We expect a population boom by the year 2050, maybe another billion people perhaps. This suggests that we'll need more land to grow food, which may mean more forests will be cut down. I recall at COP16 in Colombia, that Biodiversity Summit, the targets, country targets were created, as well as action plans were submitted. Do you think what you saw happen there is enough, are enough to protect global biodiversity?
I would say that what is important, I think, is to care about arable land. Not only land, but arable land. Because if we continue to have less arable land, we will have a problem for the world consumption tomorrow. You know that in some countries, the introduction of agroforestry is being seen as a solution and will be a solution. But also, we can combine the presence of biodiversity with food production. We just have to turn to new solutions, new ways of using our resources, natural resources, and make sure that those resources are renewed.
I know the COP summit that's coming up in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, will look at these issues. Do you see a way out of these huge problems that obviously ultimately affect homes, businesses, food systems?
You see, we have 3 COPs happening. A few weeks ago, we had in Colombia the Biodiversity COP. Today, in Baku, we have Climate COP. Tomorrow in December, we'll have the Desertification COP happening. 3 COPs happening at the same time. I mean, a few months in the same trimester, okay, and treating subjects that are interlinked. So we need more coherent action, but also coherent treatment of 3 subjects in not being treated as silos, but being treated globally, you know.
Yeah, that's a great point. Somehow we don't seem to be able to all get on the same page when it comes to these issues. The current controversy in Baku is what the President Ilham Aliyev is saying about the need to continue the extraction of oil and gas. He was also pointing out inconsistencies when it comes to the West.
So if more developed countries that are the biggest contributors, I would say, to the carbon emissions, if we have more developed countries being able to reduce the emission, it will make room for development of other countries, so they are not dependent of the full extraction of those resources. I think that the next COP, desertification in Saudi Arabia, will show how a oil-producing country is able to be an example in turning to green energy, going to green extraction, or development of the protection of biodiversity, land degradation, and the stoppage of desertification.
I would love to get your take on one of the biggest concerns right now on the planet is that the US President, Donald Trump, elect, will take office. He will lead the world's greatest nation, is what the US likes to call itself, over the next 4 years. Do you have any concerns for biodiversity as it pertains to him?
Biodiversity problems don't depend only on the presidency of the United States of America. It's a global problem that needs to be faced in any types of way, you know. So we'll wait to see what Mr. Trump wants to do about it as far as the American administration is concerned. But it won't change the problem, and it won't change the solutions that need to be taken by everyone.
Meanwhile, more than 70,000 delegates are taking part in COP29, either in Baku or virtually from abroad. And there's been lots of anticipation and concern around these summit's goals, with choice words from world leaders.
They call us petrostate now, today. This is not fair. Doubling down on fossil fuels is absurd. The clean energy revolution is here. No group, no business, and no government can stop it.
We must protect nature with man at its core. An approach that is too ideological and not pragmatic on this matter risks taking us off the road to success.
These extreme weather events that the world is facing daily suggest that humanity and the planet are hurtling towards catastrophe.
We need more resources to prepare, to respond in time in order to save lives and livelihoods, and to help people and communities rebuild after disaster.
Developing states shall not be deprived of their right to development because of what others have done.
And that's our show. We'll leave you with some of the action and events during the first week of COP29.
The sound you hear is the ticking clock.
We're still pushing for the 1.5 degrees centigrade to be respected and to keep alive, because our people in the Pacific, we truly depend on this for our survival.